All right. I'm really excited about this episode. Jon, welcome on to the Basketball Performance Podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Long time coming. We made it happen.
Absolutely. I got my notebook here, so I'm ready to go. Would you give us just a little quick background about yourself, where you're from? How did you get into hoops? And then how did you transition into coaching?
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I've been here most of my life. I started coaching when I was about 14 years old. My younger brother and his team were being coached by my dad, and I was kind of their assistant coach. And I said, "Dude, I want to do this. This is what I want to do." So my dad was really nice to me, and he said, "Hey, here's an opportunity. You can do it. I'll supervise." So I just started coaching super young. What got me into hoops was probably Space Jam. Just watching the movie, and that just kind of, me practicing my Michael Jordan dunk on the Fisher Price basket, stretching out. That's but yeah, no, I love to coach, and the last few years has been really cool. Like, I mean, it's been tough for people with COVID, of course, but it's been kind of a cool way for me to find my path and really look inward and make sense of my situation, right? And give me a little bit more direction with what I want to do.
How have you evolved as a coach since you've been doing it for so long? How have you evolved in the last, say, 6 years in terms of your approach?
I mean, that timeline is on the money in terms of where I've made most of my growth. I feel like that is for most people. Like, I just turned 30 this year, and I think you kind of look at what's important to you, and things eventually change. You hope, at least, I guess, for some people. But when I started, I was very serious, right? And I wanted to win. I was a competitor, and I still am. But it was almost a part of my identity and who I was, and even coaching young kids. I want to win every game. I want to go for it, and I think our kids did benefit from that at times. But at the same time, I kind of recognized that there was more to this as I got involved in university coaching and coaching professional athletes. Just kind of sitting back and recognizing that there's more to the technical and tactical part of the game. And just through my experience developing as a person, I knew I could offer more. I just wasn't sure what that was at that time.
I think that if you've been following your career like I have, and you see the old basketball Manitoba stuff, it was very much
Yeah.
skill based, technical, tactical based. And then I don't remember, one day you see something called free play, and then you're like, what is this? And it's
Yeah.
amazing to watch how your career is kind of like you found a space which is so necessary. Can you talk
Mhm.
about mindfulness? Because I think it's something that the best athletes all talk about to some degree, but it's something that
Yeah.
I myself need to work on. And it's something that everybody needs to work on. Talk about mindfulness. How did you get into that? And then we'll transition about how to go from mindfulness and transfer it onto the court.
Yeah, yeah. So first off, it's play free, not free play, but
Sorry,
it's all
I
good. There's no
apologize.
stress.
I apologize.
No, all good, all good. How did I get into mindfulness? I mean, when I was a kid, I'm like 13, 14, 15, my grandma had a lot of books on consciousness and spirituality, and I started to kind of read those kind of books. I wasn't really like super into it, but that was like my first exposure to it. And then I started getting into Headspace, so the app Headspace, and my friend was getting me to meditate, and I'd go along with it. And then I followed teachers like Jack Cornfield on Facebook. And then eventually, as I was following Jack Cornfield, he mentioned this person named Ram Dass had passed away. And I'm always interested when people do pass away. I'm like, man, I want to learn more about them, and what their messaging was, and how they left their mark, what their legacy was. And Ram Dass has hundreds of hours of lectures on YouTube and Spotify. So I just went to work with that for about 2 years, just listening and trying to make sense of it. And ultimately what happened was I started to have conversations with athletes and say, hey, what do you think about this? This is what I heard in the podcast. And we'd kind of dive in that way. And then essentially it became just reverse engineering a lot of that stuff to the player development workouts, and but more so just how we view video, how we look at video, has been probably the biggest piece to applying mindfulness, like applying this non-judgmental awareness, just being with what is. It has been really good for me personally. Like as you mentioned, it's something not only for the players but for the coaches too.
Can you give me an example about when you say watching video? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I'm doing it a lot with my pro athletes right now, because I recognize that they know so much, and they're at a point where they need to almost unlearn because there's just too much information, you know, and that's part of, in my opinion, that's part of playing free. You're not thinking as much when you're playing. You can just be instinctual and really trust your skills. And so when we watch video, what I'll do is I'll send it to them ahead of time. So I'll prepare an edit, it could be 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and they'll have to present the clips to me. And I'll just kind of sit back and they'll go through the clips and tell me what they're seeing and how they see the game. And from that sense, I start to get an understanding of what they value and what's important to them. But what we talk to them about is when you do watch these clips, it's just watching the clips and seeing what it is. We don't need to react to it, and go crazy about these clips because they've already happened, right? So you're just kind of, part of mindfulness, in my opinion, is being able to accept the things that are outside of your control. So when we watch it, it's like, what's the conversation that we're having with ourselves as we go through these clips? And sometimes I'll catch the players and I'll say, hey, like, just how you're criticizing yourself right now, is that helpful? Is this helping you right now? Are you closing off? Or are you opening up and being expansive and taking in information, so that you can grow from this, right? Like, we want video to be an experience where you're growing and learning, and this is going to help you the next time you practice, the next time you play. And what I saw, for many different coaches, it was almost, we're going to punish you, we're going to embarrass you. And what players ended up doing is they started to close off to it. They'd tune their coaches out. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity to really connect with people and learn more about how they see the game and how they see themselves.
That's fascinating. So just a follow-up question about that. As I'm watching the video, am I aware of how I feel now since it's done, or am I recapping how I felt in that moment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it could be both, right? Like, as you went through that experience, like if we were working on emotional regulation, right? Like, okay, you were triggered in the game. We might talk about, okay, how did you feel in that moment? What did you feel in your body? Because a big part of mindfulness, in my opinion, one of the major buckets or pillars is the non-judgmental awareness. And it's being able to read your state. So it is reflecting on what happened, but also if they feel triggered in some way, they're sitting there and they see this play and it happened, let's say 2 weeks ago, we may be focusing on that. So I agree. I think it could be both. It could be both elements of it.
Then what would the follow-up step be? Like, I'm looking at myself, Jon, and I blew this layup.
Yeah.
And it was because I was nervous. What's the follow-up step that we can do for even a coach like me who is well aware that this is very important, but doesn't have the expertise? But I would love to be able to implement something like this into my regimen, my program. What's the follow-up steps now?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, I think, getting more context. Like, tell me about it. Like, you maybe you missed a few layups. Like, what do you see? What do you feel? How do you think we can improve this? So asking for the player's perspective, and then as you get more context, then you can start to problem solve with them, giving them that sense of autonomy that, hey, as you can start to even have one strategy. Give me one strategy that could work for you. Okay, cool. And then the next time that happens, let's see if you can apply it. So I think a lot of times as coaches, as athletes, we're constantly looking outside of ourselves for the answer. Constantly, man. And there's a lot of information. There's a lot of people that can tell us what to do with our lives, with our games. But I think when you practice the mindfulness, when you get quiet, the famous quote from Ram Dass is the quieter you get, the more you can hear. Right. So if I can sit with it and I can just watch it and be with what is, man, oh man, the answers are going to come. So that's a big part of it. Just seeing what's in front of you.
That's
Does
very
that
interesting.
does that start to move the needle for you?
No, it definitely does. It definitely does. And I'm just thinking psychologically, and I'm just trying to learn here that
Yeah.
if I'm watching a terrible game, right? Like say the last game for me was just atrocious. It was awful. It's hard to watch and it may not do very well for my self-confidence, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it's out of my control, right? That's what you're
No,
saying.
but it's also you're perceiving that as a terrible game.
Mm,
It's the frame that you're coming from. Like if you
yep.
say, "Hey, this happened," and you can accept what happened, I think a lot of that resistance that's building up, saying, "Oh, this is a terrible game. I was bad. I was brutal. It was a pathetic effort," and you start building it up. Man, of course, that's going to be a terrible experience to watch that video, and it's going to continue to affect your confidence because you're giving yourself some evidence and proof for why you're not good enough or why you think you're not a good player, and that contributes to your confidence. So if you can come from a frame and just, as I've mentioned, just see it for what it is, dude. You were 0 for 10. Like what is a bad game, And now, okay, what are we going to do about it? That happened, and maybe it's a situation where you need to flush it. Like that's happened too with players. Like, I was just out of it. that wasn't it.
Right.
And now I'm just going to focus my attention on something that's going to help me. So we talk about 3 buckets or 3 pillars within mindfulness. The first one is awareness. The second one is attention. And then the third is assertiveness. So within attention, it's determining what's helpful, right? What's helpful, what's unhelpful. And for different people, it's different things. So maybe I don't want to watch that game for a day. I'm going to take some time. I'm going to, journal. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go through it. And then I'll process the game. Maybe it's something different for another person, but it's learning to train your attention. But that first piece, that awareness piece, that non-judgmental awareness is really the rub, man. That's where it starts.
So I'm just writing notes. So interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think, like you mentioned, the frame of how we frame something is just so important. Right. And I think that's where it all starts, is the awareness of, wow, by me framing it like this, it serves no one. Right? Especially me. And then going into the attention, where do I place my attention? Is it that I'm feeling down, or is it I'm going to do something about it? And then the assertiveness. So I think those 3 buckets are very important.
Yeah.
Are there ways that we can recenter ourselves in a skill development session, in a game, or maybe it's an out of bounds, like something quick, like in a timeout, we might all sit together for like 10 seconds or 5 seconds and kind of recenter ourselves to being in the moment, if that's what you believe in. What kind of advice do you have on that?
Yeah, I think it's your physiology. I think you have to start to get a sense of your physiology and understand that there's certain things, certain intrinsic tools that you have access to at all times. And that's things like your breath. So when you breathe and when you're conscious of your breathing, you're learning to regulate. And then the more you regulate, the more you read your system, and the more you reinforce specific patterns that are going to be helpful in those moments.
So breath. So to come back to kind of like a breath and recenter yourself if things are not going the way that you hope for?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of different strategies. I think the breath is most consistent from what I've seen from different high performance athletes, because if you can take a breath, what you're doing is you're creating space from what just happened, right? And it's not an easy thing to do. It's very unnatural to be patient with yourself and not be impulsive. Um, but it's a back and forth. It's part of the work. It's coming back to it again and again and catching yourself where you feel then you can actually take steps in a direction you want to go.
As a practitioner, how much of their nutrition, sleep, all that kind
It's
of stuff?
everything. It's everything. It's crazy because like I won't mention specific programs and specific experiences that I've had, but there's been times where I knew the athletes weren't eating well or sleeping well, or just basically things like hydration, and they weren't supported that way. And then I'm thinking about, okay, how do I do mindfulness? It's like, yo, just sleep more, bro. Like just cut out some of the processed food, because ultimately, and this very well, like your input equals your output.
Exactly.
Whatever you put into your body, however you take care of your body, that's going to set you up for optimal performance.
That's almost like the foundation before you do anything, right? It's like, so if you're not even dealing with like the basics of the basics, like hydration, nutrition, recovery, sleep, which is 90% of everything, like there's nothing that's really going to help you maximize your results to be the player that you can be without all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, 100%, brother. I mean, even for me personally as a coach, like I used to stay up, bro. I'd stay up 3 a.m. every night. I'd sleep in till, I don't know, 8:30, 9 a.m. And I was just worn down, super worn down mentally. And I was very irritable, impulsive. I'd freak out on players. Like I used to be that kind of guy. And now mentally, it's honestly like a superpower when you start sleeping, using a specific routine and getting to bed at a certain time. It's changed my life. Like
Right.
it allows me to have the willpower I need to bring in some mindfulness, to be disciplined. And then mindfulness generates all this extra momentum.
I'm also thinking about like macronutrient intake. I mean, because I'm in the field of strength and conditioning as well, getting enough fat, getting enough protein, all that kind of stuff, and not eating as many processed carbs. I mean, how many basketball players out there are just eating like just junk? It's not even real food. And then they get nervous during a game. They're wondering why they have this anxiety, right? Where people have nervous breakdowns every day, who are not athletes. And the first thing you look at is their diet, and it's like all this alcohol, all this like sugar, all this kind of stuff. And they're like, why don't we just change this first, and then you come back? And then and oh, by the way, add exercise into your life, and things go like it's quite incredible, right? Like it's
amazing. That's the first thing we do when I take on any athlete is we ask them about their sleep and about their hydration and their nutrition. It's the foundation. It's the basics.
I don't know anybody who has kind of dove into the space like you have in basketball. How has the reception been for our basketball community globally when you're talking about this? Because I was listening to Manitoba, and you were talking about Kobe, and he talks about this all the time. But how many people actually put it into practice, that's a different story. Tell me, like, what's the reception that you've gotten speaking about this on social media, speaking on this in conferences? What's kind of the feedback that you've gotten?
That's a great question, man. I feel with Kobe, it definitely helps because anytime I introduce it to players, I'm bringing up Kobe Like I'll
Sure.
bring up specific clips. I'll bring up, LeBron James and different people like that. Um, but to be honest with you, bro, like to be really, really honest with you, I feel like I've lost friends. I've lost coaches that I really thought believed in me, and they
Mm,
think I'm crazy. They honestly think I'm crazy to talk about mindfulness and mental performance when I used to be that heavy, heavy, technical and tactical video guy. And they don't say it, or it's not super obvious. It's just I can just tell that our relationship isn't the same. It's definitely changed since I've gotten into this space. The other thing that I'm really conscious of when I go through it is the language. Like there's some people you say mindfulness and immediately they think it's woo woo, like, and they won't even touch it. So with those people, you got to know that and know your audience, and then meet them where they're at. Like that's everything. So an example could be, instead of calling it mindfulness, you call it mental performance. It's the same stuff, bro. It's all the same. Um, and the other crazy thing is I've got all these coaches coming to me saying, "Hey, like, teach me mindfulness, teach me how I can implement it." But you probably already are. When you think about it, think about, okay, how do you help your players develop awareness? How do you, as a coach, when you go through this, how do you help them shift their attention to what's helpful? How do you help them to take action and be assertive? You're
mm.
already doing it. It's just it's language, it's the lingo. I mean, there are specific things with breathing and physiology that we're playing around with, but uh, it's just it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different from what I'm doing, but there's things that you're doing. I could be like, yo, that's basketball mindfulness. That's it right there. Yeah.
I'm just thinking of when I was 15, 16 years old. I mean, this doesn't come across as particularly cool, right? Because it's not flashy and it's not, you're not dribbling four balls at the same time. It just doesn't look cool. But as you get older, you understand how this is. I mean, this is everything. Like you're like the mental mindset, mindfulness part, whatever you want to call it, is everything. How do you go about introducing it to your players and then having them retain it and building it into their routine? Now, you talked about professional players. Those are people who already have incentive to come to you and be like, you know what, I want to do this, right? So that's a different story. What if you're working with like a high school and you want to start implementing this into, I don't know, after their warm up, right before the huddle, like where would you put this on game day or practice?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I would do, as I mentioned, is I'd talk about Kobe.
Yep.
If I was specifically coming in to present on mindfulness, if, let's say, I was a high school basketball coach and I was taking on a team and I knew mindfulness was important to me and I wanted to start teaching it and implementing it into what we were doing, I just have conversations with our team, like, all right, you've been playing the game for a few years. Like, what are your challenges? What are you focused on improving? What's important to you? Well, coach, when I get in these situations, I get really frustrated or I get really angry and I really don't know what to do. I don't know what tools I should use. So I open it up that way and I ask questions where they start to get curious, and then we kind of get into, okay, what are your strategies? What's worked in the past? All right, cool. Have you ever thought about doing this? Do you think this could be helpful to what you're doing? And then it's a dialogue of back and forth, and then we go into it. I think if you just kind of went into it and you said, okay, today we're gonna sit down before practice and we're gonna take 5 minutes to breathe, and there was no like lead up or build up into it, I feel like it would be pretty difficult and you'd get some pushback. And I've experienced pushback. There's a lot of people pushing back with it, as much as you have the Kobe Bryants of the world pushing, not pushing, but valuing presence and how that really impacted his game and transformed his game. There's still people that aren't into it yet because they haven't experienced it. So that's the other part of it, is that if we can just give them the opportunity to start to dig into it once we've had some of these conversations, I think it can be a game changer, and you're going to have buy-in with your team and whoever else that's involved.
Right. So it's not something that you're coming in and immediately, all right, guys, sit down, close your eyes, 5 minutes. There's like a slow build up to this. We're giving you,
Oh, I
we're giving
I
you
think so.
forewarning.
I think it's gonna be slower because it, as I've mentioned, the thing that you got to consider, like the best teachers, whether it be mindfulness, whether it be basketball skill development, strength and conditioning, they meet their athletes where they're at.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if they're already into it and they're like reading books on mindfulness and they're doing all, they're already meditating, you're like, yo, we'll jump in right away. There's
Right.
no question. But if they're not doing those things, then you gotta find a way, in a different way than just jumping in the deep end right away.
Right. Right. Makes sense. Well, that's awesome. And I hope our listeners have taken a lot out of this. I want to switch gears a little bit. And like you mentioned before, you have a lot of experience and background on the technical, tactical side, the film watching side. And for anybody who doesn't know, Jon has awesome stuff out there with breaking down film, and it's just first class stuff. When analyzing an athlete and traits and patterns that they might have, what are particular things that you were looking for, maybe before working with an athlete, in terms of their film and seeing where to take it from there in terms of helping their skill and helping them technically and tactically?
Yeah, the first thing that stands out to me the most, like that I've been most fascinated with in the last, I don't know, 6 months, has been vision. I
Mm,
think vision is something that's underappreciated and it's not really taught across the board at a high level. Like, what do you look for? And it also is, and if you can tune into your vision, you can regulate your system, you can regulate your physiology or manage your physiology better. Because what happens when you're in fight or flight is you narrow your vision, you get tunnel vision or whatever, you're focused straight ahead. And what I've seen is, as I watch the players that usually get really nervous and anxious, is as they're subbed into the game, you can just look at their eyes and they're just like this, like they're just ball watching, and they're not able to pick up the visual cues that ultimately allows them to anticipate and make decisions.
yep.
So I'm sitting back, and that's what the first thing I'm watching for. Like, if someone's got poor shot preparation, it probably has a lot to do with vision.
Interesting. Yes. That's, let's go off that because that's something that I've been fascinated with, and it's something that I've also been looking into. So books like The Quiet Eye, Doug Lamov's book about teaching, it's a lot of the novice, let's call it novice athletes, their head will look many, many different places because they don't know what to look for. Whereas the veteran, there's only a few possibilities, right? There's principles in certain situations, say a pick and roll. So there's only a few important things in the cluster of things to actually look for. Is it a shot? Is it hit the roller? Is it hit this guy's? So there's a few things there. But what's interesting is, Jon, so say I make my vision better, say the clarity of my vision. That doesn't necessarily mean that my vision on the court will be better, right?
That's a good question. Yeah, maybe tell me more with what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I have 20/20 vision, like everything that I see is very clear, that doesn't necessarily make my vision on the court any better. Where it's more like, because I'm just seeing everything, I'm still seeing it very fast. If I'm very nervous, like you just said, I'm looking in many, many different places and I'm seeing those many, many things very, very clearly. But, and here's the mindfulness part of it. If I can quiet myself and I know the principles of the certain situation, then there's only
Yes.
a few things to look for. It's almost like playing a video game where, like, oh, I know this guy is going to come out of this corner right now, boom. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like an experience. And then, yeah.
You've hit it right on the head. That's exactly it. And I feel there's certain players, you watch them and you're like, yo, they just seem so composed and so in control of themselves that they're starting to really control the game. And the game is it's so slow for them. And I
Yeah.
think it's exactly what you said. It's they know what to look for. It's such a good point.
Right. And here's where we combine Alex's stuff, or what we'll call it, because we both know and admire Alex, is like small sided games. That's where that I don't want to call it predetermined, but you know what's going to happen next comes from, right? So you know what to look for. You know, is it a slip? Is it a ghost? Is it a flip? Like you have an idea of what's coming, and then you probably can predetermine the next steps, and you have certain probabilities of what will happen out of those different actions. And then therefore your vision is better. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's it. That's all. That's what I got too, man. That's you're on the money. We're in total alignment. Yeah.
I would love your opinion on this. And guys, I had no idea Jon was going to say vision, and he didn't know that this was a fascination of mine as well. When it comes to skill development, Jon, let's talk about vision. So if I have a eye patch and I'm working on shooting with my dominant eye or non-dominant eye, I'm turning off the light. I'm a little bit crazy. So there's a strobe light going on while I'm shooting, right? Like, do those things necessarily, like, what do you think of I use them, but what is your opinion on those kind of things?
Oh, brother, I don't think I have an opinion, to be completely honest with you. That's new territory for me. I haven't even thought about that yet. Like, you're talking about a strobe light going on and shooting, and I don't know. I'm not sure. My honest answer, I have no. I don't want to comment because I don't know.
No, very cool.
Yeah,
very cool. So I've been playing with it, like, again, and I think, like, when you talk about vision, and I don't want to keep going back to the mindfulness part, but please, the quiet mind can really help your vision.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as I mentioned, right, when you're in fight or flight, your vision is going to close down, and you've got all these thoughts. You're anxious. Quieting the mind. It's an interesting thing, though, when you think about quieting the mind. I think if you say to yourself, "I'm going to quiet the mind," you don't quiet the mind. Like, it's almost it starts to get sped up because you're pushing it away. Like, all these thoughts that are coming in. I think the first thing is, if you can sit there and you can breathe and you can be with it, then naturally what happens is you start to quiet the mind. It's like, for me, when I sit down and I meditate, first 10 minutes, it's freaking chaos, bro. Like, there's so much shit coming at me. It's heavy. But as I sit there, I can really start to settle in. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And that's an ongoing practice. When I first started, it would go on like that for a while. Now it doesn't take me as long.
Do you know what's a better explanation? Not quieting the mind. It's playing free. That would be a much. That would be much. I think that's much more appropriate. Okay, so we talked about when we're looking at film to help an athlete. What about, say, you're in charge of a scout, and they have the number 2 player in the country? What are some kind of patterns and traits that you're looking at to being like, okay, here's some of the habits that he has. Here's what he likes to do. Here's, again, I mean, the patterns and traits that he likes to go to. Like, what are you looking for in particular to kind of give yourself an edge?
And just to understand, so I'd be taking the scout and then presenting it to the players?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess the things that I'd look for. Okay, so again, I'm coming back to the same concept. I would get the players to do the scout and watch the video. I'm going to watch the video, of course, but I think if they can start to watch it and have conversations about it, their retention when they actually review the scout is going to go through the roof.
Agree.
I've done it so many different ways, man. I used to have 15-page scouting reports. Like, it was insane, and now the more I can get them to do it, and obviously it might be tough if you've got younger high school kids and you don't have access to the technology or whatever else. I just think whatever it is, whatever is important to you, whatever you value, try to keep it simple. I was really big when I was a university coach, trying to get my head coach to do it. We'd say, hey, can we just get this to 1 page? just a one-page scouting report, and give a few simple things. It's also too talking to the players and saying, hey, like what helps you when you look at this? Knowing all these numbers and all these, analytics, does that help you? Do you like to focus on individual player clips, seeing them get buckets and seeing what they do? Is it more of the team clips? So I'm just realizing, bro, I'm not playing the game. Like at the end of the day, an ideal situation for me, if I'm a head coach, is I can literally sit there probably the whole game, call the odd timeout, and have the players just problem solve. Like they're on the court talking to each other, saying, hey, we got to do this, we got to do this. Obviously, we have some kind of structure and foundation for how we want to play, and everybody's aligned with that. But I want them to be the problem solvers. I want them to figure it out.
Yeah. That was actually a transition that I made as well, where I attempted to do everything for them so that it would just be easy and smooth. And because if I did it, obviously it's going to be very smooth. But then I realized that I was taking their education away from them, and I was putting my agenda onto them when I'm not the one that's going to be playing. They're going to be the one that's playing, and what they perceive could be different from what I perceive, right? And so having them come together and do a scouting report, and it's like, all right, Nicole, you're going to do 3 clips here. Ada, you're going to do 3 clips and you're going to present it to the team today. That was significantly more helpful because, number one, like you talked about retention. Number 2, it's kind of like a peer thing. So it's like when the coach does it, at least in this part of the world, they feel like, oh, then everything must be right. Whereas if your peer does it, then it's like, hey, someone might come back and not challenge them, but like, hey, what I saw was this, what do you think? And then that conversation, whether it's team building, whether it's, it definitely has more retention. That's for sure.
Oh man, totally. Like it's just sometimes you're a little bit more comfortable with your teammate than your coach. And,
right.
And I agree totally too. It's getting to a point where very few of these players watch games.
Yeah.
Like
yes.
everybody's watching, a few highlights on Instagram and
right.
And that's cool. But hey, if you want to be a player, if you want to have longevity in the game, take care of your body, take care of your mind, and really invest in yourself. And you invest in yourself through education. You got to learn the game. You got to figure this out. What do you think? You talk about Kobe. We've mentioned him a few times. Like, what do you think Kobe's doing? Do you think he's waiting on the coach to send him edits and give him a scout? Bro, he's digging in. He's essentially a coach. Right.
For
so
sure.
That's what I think what the goal is, like with Play Free, is we want players to feel like they have the tools, that they can be self-reliant, and they know what to look for. They can think for themselves, and they're still coachable. Like they're still going to be open to instruction. Like that's a big part of it, having a relationship with your coach. But we don't want people to be needy. Like, oh, I need someone to tell me what to do. It's like, no, dude, you are a lot stronger than everybody's giving you credit for. You can do a lot more, So that's a big part of it, man.
Time has just flown. I wish we had a couple more hours, but I want to transition into talking to you. What are some of the goals that you have for the next 10 years as of right now?
The big goals that I have, 10 years is
5 years. I know that's too.
You know what though, bro? It's crazy, but we're gonna look back in this interview and it's gonna be like, yo, those 10 years flew by. But
yeah.
I would say the biggest goal I have right now has been getting Play Free to a point where I'm reaching as many athletes as I can, high performance athletes, and do it in a way that's very, it's quality. Where it's not just like we're just trying to make money, we're trying to have an impact. It's a lot bigger than money, because I'm sure, like you, why you got into coaching is you wish you had a coach that did all the stuff that
exactly.
and that you appreciate. And so right now I want to try to get my membership up to about 250 people within the next 3 years. And kind of see where it goes. Like I'd love to work with NBA clients. Like I'd like to eventually work with people in the NBA just because I feel there's so much freaking chaos that those guys have to deal with. And I feel like mindfulness, especially like we've talked about, sleep is important, nutrition. And it seems like a lot of those guys are now onto that. But I feel like the mindfulness part of the game is something that all NBA players could utilize in that world, in that space.
Last question for you. What does a meaningful life look like for Coach Jon G?
Man, a meaningful life, honestly, is just being aligned with my purpose every single day. Just being disciplined and doing what I need to do. There's things that you want to do. Like a couple weeks back, I was like, yo, I'd really love to jump in the sauna right now, and just hang out and chill for the next couple hours. But at the same time, the one message I've been really big on recently has been speed. I have all the structure, I have all the tools that I need with Play Free. So now it's like I am, putting my foot on the gas and we are going. So I'm just making plays, bro. Like that's it. But ultimately, everything that I'm doing is aligned with my purpose. And I feel like if I'm doing that, I'm impacting the world how I want to impact the world. There's nothing else that's important to me, really. I mean, don't get me wrong. Family, my friends, very important to me. But if I'm living a purpose-driven life, if I'm disciplined every day with what I'm doing my best, everything else seems to take care of itself.
Yep.
My relationships are top-notch when I do that. My money situation, top-notch. Dating has been a big thing for me because I was always like this coach, super intense, like I'm doing the video, like never making time for a social life. As I've been more aligned with my purpose and I'm taking steps that way, that's taking care of itself. When I was struggling before, so like it's coming from your core, the core of who you are, instead of getting caught in all the surface level stuff that makes you, play this game of roller coaster, high and low, high and low, high and low, and just getting tripped up on that. So yeah, I think it's just being purpose driven, brother. That's it. That's all.
Agreed. Totally agreed. You have
Yeah.
awesome content out there. You are a unique guy in terms of being able to blend the best of both worlds. Where can people find out more about you and get in contact with you?
Yeah, the best thing that they can do is contact me on my Instagram, which is @playfreeball. And people can apply for membership. I've got workbooks that are coming out, like a journal that's coming out to the public that people can work through, even if they're not a member. So I think that will be pretty cool. But yeah, hit me up on Instagram and we'll make a play. We'll figure it out.
I personally highly recommend Jon. The stuff that he's doing is rare in our industry, but it is so crucial. And to be honest, I think everybody on the show knows that one of the reasons I wanted to be a coach is because I never felt like I could reach. I didn't reach my potential. And one of the biggest things was because I had anxiety when I played. I wasn't able to center myself. I didn't know the stuff that I know now. If I had someone like Jon, my life would have been very different. And my happiness as a kid would have been very different. So Jon, thank you for everything that you do for the industry. It's very, very needed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Just hang on to the line, guys. We will see you soon.